No husband, no kids, no fortune? Oh, right. Empty life. My sister Laura leaned back in her chair at the Thanksgiving table, basking in the warm, judgmental laughter of our parents, James and Emily, oblivious to the fact that I had been secretly bankrolling their entire picture-perfect existence for the last 5 years. That moment changed everything. The air in the dining room of my parents' comfortable but utterly mortgaged suburban home in Dallas, Texas, was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, apple pie, and a lifetime of resentment. The annual Thanksgiving dinner was always a gauntlet, but this year, Laura was particularly vicious. She'd just finished detailing her recent baby moon cruise to the Bahamas, paid for by her husband, David, a mid-level manager at a logistics firm. Everyone, especially Mom and Dad, hung on her every word. Laura, the golden child, the one who achieved the American dream trifecta, a big white wedding, 2.5 children, 2 already, 1 on the way, and a house full of Pottery Barn furniture. And then there was me, Sarah, the New York City financial consultant, unmarried, childless, and, in their view, fundamentally incomplete. Honestly, Sarah, I just worry about you, Laura said, her voice dripping with fake concern, loud enough to stop the carving knife my father was holding. I mean, what's it all for? The penthouse apartment? The fancy consulting trips? You're 42 and you have nobody to share it with. No husband, no kids, no fortune to pass on, because, let's be real, you spend it all on yourself. Oh, right. She paused, fluttering her long blonde eyelashes at my mother, who smiled approvingly. An empty life. The laughter that followed wasn't a gentle chuckle, it was a harsh, collective judgment. Dad, James, clapped Michael, my older brother, on the back. Michael, who had nearly choked on his bourbon and coke but managed to join in the mirth. Michael, 35 and still living in the guest room, occasionally making a few bucks driving for a rideshare app, perpetually shielded from real life by my parents' pockets. Mom, Emily, just shook her head with a look of profound pity and disappointment. Laura has a point, sweetie. It's just, we want you to be happy. We want grandchildren. She sighed, as if my sole purpose on this earth was to produce tiny humans for her amusement. I felt the familiar cold knot in my stomach tighten, but this time the pain was overridden by a strange, exhilarating calm. I hadn't flown 1,600 miles from Manhattan to Dallas just for the traditional humiliation potluck. I had come prepared. My expression remained serene, my spine ramrod straight in my tailored black sheath dress, the kind of expensive, understated armor they never understood. I took a slow sip of my ice water, letting the silence stretch just long enough for their smug self-satisfaction to peak. That's interesting, Laura, I finally said, my voice smooth, quiet, and cutting through the residual laughter like a laser. A fortune. That's what we're talking about, right? Value. Legacy. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the white linen tablecloth, meeting my sister's challenging gaze with a deadly lack of emotion. You're right. I've been so focused on my empty life I totally forgot to ask the important question. I turned my gaze slowly, first to my father, then my mother. Their smiles were fading, replaced by mild confusion. They knew my tone. This was the tone I used when I delivered brutal financial news to bankrupt CEOs. So, James, Emily, I continued, using their first names, which always signaled a shift in dynamics. While we're discussing fortunes, let's talk about yours. Where's your money? Where's the retirement fund you brag about to the neighbors? Where's the cash reserve for that new pool you just put in? Oh, right, I finished, the final 2 words landing with the sickening weight of a guillotine. I've been supporting you until today. Laura froze, her mouth slightly agape, the smirk melting into horrified realization. Dad's face, usually ruddy from Texas sunshine and cheap beer, went bone white. Mom dropped her napkin, the sound loud in the sudden, absolute silence. Michael, who was taking a celebratory gulp of his drink after his sister's triumph, nearly choked, spluttering bourbon all over the heirloom runner. The sheer, naked panic in their eyes was the sweetest sight I had ever witnessed. It was the moment they realized the house they were sitting in, the food they were about to eat, and the comfortable life they assumed was their birthright, had been a careful construction financed entirely by the empty life they had just spent 10 minutes mocking. I reached into my small, expensive clutch and pulled out a single, perfectly folded document, a certified letter from my lawyer, Chloe, and placed it next to the cranberry sauce. The game had just begun. That moment changed everything. It was the final, brutal culmination of 40 years of systematic, soul-crushing favoritism, and it was the instant I reclaimed not just my money, but my sanity. My journey to that dining room table, the one I had indirectly paid for, was paved with tiny, excruciating cuts. The next morning, the silence in the house was oppressive, thick with unaddressed panic. Dad was already on the phone in his home office, which doubled as Michael's gaming den, frantically whispering about a bank account. Mom was staring blankly at the burnt crust of the apple pie. I didn't wait for them to process their shock. I simply packed my bags, leaving the letter from Chloe on the kitchen counter, a notice of immediate cessation of all financial transfers. The letter was formal, listing every direct deposit, every insurance premium paid, every credit card bill I had covered over the last 5 years, neatly totaling over $850,000. It was a receipt for my stolen life. The decision to cut them off wasn't spontaneous. It was a plan 2 decades in the making, born out of 1,000 instances of their casual cruelty. I needed to go back to the beginning to truly understand the depth of my resentment and why $850,000 was a cheap price for my freedom. Growing up in the sprawling suburbs of Austin, Texas, I was always the responsible one. Laura was the pretty one, Michael the charming one. I was the brain, the one who effortlessly pulled straight A's and excelled in math and science. But academic achievement was always secondary to social standing in the Miller family hierarchy. If I brought home a perfect report card, my parents would nod briefly, then launch into a 5-minute monologue about Laura's latest cheerleading trophy or Michael's touchdown. I remember clearly applying to MIT in my senior year. I got in, with a full scholarship. I was ecstatic. My parents' response? "That's wonderful, Sarah. But who will help us run the books for Dad's small construction company while you're all the way in Massachusetts? Besides, Laura needs money for her first year at UT, and we can't afford both tuitions, even with your scholarship money being put toward our mortgage." They didn't just ask me to sacrifice, they engineered it. They subtly guilt-tripped me into turning down MIT, claiming my duty to the family was paramount. I ended up at the local community college, then transferred to the University of Texas at Austin, working 3 part-time jobs while juggling a finance major. My scholarship money, the money I earned, went directly into paying down the mortgage on the house Laura would eventually use for her lavish wedding reception, a wedding I was forced to help pay for. The weight of that initial sacrifice only grew heavier over the years. While I was working 60-hour weeks in my 20s, Laura was finding herself traveling Europe, funded by a seemingly endless stream of emergency funds from Mom and Dad. Michael was racking up student loan debt he never intended to pay back. By the time I landed my first big break, a consulting gig with a boutique M&A firm in Chicago, I was already carrying the psychological and financial baggage of my entire family. My big move to Chicago was supposed to be my liberation, but it only formalized my role as the family's secret ATM. Dad's construction business, which was poorly managed and riddled with bad debts, was constantly on the brink of collapse. Every few months, I'd get a frantic call from Mom. "Sarah, your father needs $30,000 for equipment immediately or he loses the contract." Or, "Laura needs help with a down payment. She and David are struggling." I always transferred the money. Why? Because the alternative, their public, dramatic collapse, felt like a stain on my own hard-won success. It was a perverse form of self-preservation. I paid them to keep them quiet and stable, so I could focus on my career. My career exploded. I moved to New York City in my early 30s, specializing in high-stakes corporate restructuring. I was brilliant at my job because I had learned the cruel arithmetic of survival early on. I knew how to cut losses, how to maximize assets, and how to execute a hostile takeover. Skills I was now unconsciously training to use on my own blood. I bought the penthouse apartment in Tribeca. I wore designer clothes. I traveled the world for work. I had achieved the financial fortune Laura sneered at. Yet I remained their dirty little secret, the bank account they tapped, but the daughter they refused to acknowledge as successful. They couldn't reconcile my independence with their outdated view of womanhood. To them, a woman without a husband and children was a failure, no matter how many millions she managed. The final discovery that cemented my decision was chillingly mundane. It happened 6 months ago. I had been visiting for a mandatory family BBQ, a Texas ritual featuring mediocre brisket and forced smiles. I was working remotely in the kitchen, logging into the family bank account to confirm a large transfer for what Mom claimed was a surprise home renovation. While logged in, I noticed a recent, small transaction. A $50 fee for a consultation with a local estate lawyer. My antennae immediately went up. I knew Dad hadn't updated his will since I was born. Out of an abundance of caution and driven by a lifetime of suspicion, I did what any M&A professional would do. I ran a quick deep dive. Dad's password for everything was still Texas 78. Pathetically predictable. I accessed their email, and there it was. A chain of correspondence with the lawyer, Frank Davies. The surprise renovation was a lie. The consultation was about finalizing the family trust and will. And the contents of the draft will were a gut punch. Not because of the money, but because of the sheer malice. The will stipulated that 90% of the estate, which was mostly the house, since I'd paid off the mortgage but they still had equity, would be split between Laura and Michael. I was to receive a single symbolic bequest. Dad's antique pocket watch, valued at less than $1,000. The accompanying email, sent by my mother to the lawyer, contained the cruelest line. Sarah has her own money, and honestly, she's too busy to appreciate family heirlooms. This way, we ensure the house stays in the family and helps the kids who actually value tradition. They were actively conspiring to cut me out, justifying it with the very success they despised. The irony was suffocating. I had funded the asset they were now legally withholding from me, simply because they considered me an outsider, a woman who rejected their conventional life. That email made the transition from injured daughter to ruthless strategist seamless. The emotional pain was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. I wasn't just wronged, I was being defrauded of emotional investment. They were using my money to finance their own prejudice. I immediately called my best friend, Chloe Chen. Chloe and I had been roommates in Chicago and were currently operating on parallel high-powered tracks in New York. She was a top corporate litigation attorney, specializing in high-net-worth clients and complex financial separation. They finally did it, I told her over a bottle of expensive Cabernet at our usual happy hour spot in the financial district. They wrote me out of the will, Chloe, the will for the house I paid for. Chloe, a woman who never flinched, didn't flinch. Details, Sarah. I need proof of contribution, intent, and documentation of the financial dependency. For the next 4 months, my revenge plan became my secondary consulting project. It wasn't about the house. It was about demonstrating irrefutable, public, and financially devastating control. I used my skills as a financial analyst to compile an irrefutable dossier. I printed every check, every wire transfer, every utility bill, every property tax payment, every health insurance premium receipt I had covered for Mom and Dad. I found the emails where Dad begged me for a last-minute wire transfer to avoid foreclosure. I even had a separate ledger detailing the loans I had given Michael that he never repaid, totaling another $150,000. It was a paper trail of their utter reliance on my empty life. My plan wasn't just to stop the payments, it was to create a scenario where the immediate cessation of funds would trigger a domino effect of financial collapse, all while demonstrating their blatant hypocrisy. We need the timing to be perfect, I explained to Chloe in her sleek, open-plan law office overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Thanksgiving, high drama. They're all gathered, smug in their Texas bubble, right before the December mortgage and insurance premiums are due. I need the cutoff to be a certified legal document to eliminate any chance of them crying duress or misunderstanding. Chloe was impressed. It's brilliant, Sarah. You're not just breaking up with them, you're executing a leveraged buyout of their entire relationship. We'll draft a formal letter of termination of financial support, citing specific sections of the Texas Property Code regarding contributions to jointly held assets, even if you're not on the deed. It won't get you the house back, but it will confirm, legally, that you were the sole financial engine. I didn't want the house. I wanted the look on Laura's face when she realized the fortune she envied was actually her parents' debt. The time leading up to Thanksgiving was surreal. I flew down the Tuesday before, navigating the usual holiday airport chaos, trying to keep a neutral expression while knowing I was carrying a grenade in my carry-on bag. I watched them in the days before the dinner. Mom fretting over the seating arrangement, Dad watching football and drinking light beer, Laura coming over with her perfect kids to bake cookies. They were all so blissfully unaware, so comfortably entrenched in their delusion that they were the benevolent family unit, and I was the occasionally useful, but ultimately flawed, satellite. Michael, surprisingly, was the only one who seemed marginally uneasy. He cornered me one afternoon while I was making myself a Starbucks run, an essential American ritual even in my family's hostile environment. "Hey, Sarah," he mumbled, fidgeting with his keys. "About, the last few years. You've been really generous." I looked at him, my expression unreadable. "Generous with what, Michael? My time? My money?" "The money," he admitted, looking down at his worn cowboy boots. "It's just, I heard Dad talking about the mortgage a few weeks ago. He said they were finally out of the woods and could focus on their retirement portfolio." I nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "That's good news for them." "Yeah, but they also said they were going to do something nice for Laura and David for the new baby. Maybe help them upgrade their SUV." That was it. The final, disgusting piece of the puzzle. They were taking my money, claiming they were finally solvent, and immediately redirecting their newly freed-up cash, the cash I was providing, to shower gifts on the golden child. They weren't just taking my support, they were using it as a weapon of favoritism against me. "Thanks for the heads up, Michael," I said, putting my sunglasses on. "I appreciate the spill. Enjoy the brisket on Thursday." I walked away, feeling a sudden surge of vindication. You messed with the wrong daughter, I thought, heading back into the house, my plan now executed with zero hesitation. The next 24 hours were spent in a state of hyper-calm, observing my family, cataloging their entitlement, and waiting for the right moment. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was the auditor, ready to drop the hammer. The tension that descended after I dropped the bombshell, "I've been supporting you until today," was biblical. The silence wasn't a lack of noise. It was the sound of four people's financial futures collapsing into a black hole. Laura was the first to recover, driven by pure indignation. "What are you talking about, Sarah? What payments? Dad's company has been doing great. You sent us a few checks for Christmas, maybe a gift for the kids. That's it?" Her voice was shrill, completely betraying her attempt at haughty dismissal. I picked up the heavy, certified letter, which had Chloe's firm's logo, Chen and Associates, prominently displayed, and tapped it lightly against the white tablecloth. "This isn't a Christmas card, Laura. This is a formal legal notification of financial severance effective immediately." I looked at Dad, who was now gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. "Dad, James, why don't you explain to your children what I mean?" He couldn't speak. He just sat there breathing hard, his facey a roadmap of denial and terror. "Fine, I'll do the summary," I said, my tone shifting into the professional, non-negotiable voice I used when a corporate client defaulted. "For the past 5 years, I have covered, in full, the following family expenses. 1. The monthly mortgage payment on this property, totaling $185,000. 2. The premiums for mom and dad's supplemental health insurance, which, post-Obamacare, was quite substantial, totaling $62,000. 3. The property taxes and HOA fees, $41,000. 4. A total of $38,000 in business loans to dad that were never documented or repaid, which kept his company from defaulting on its bank lines. And finally, the most recent installment of $15,000 I paid last month to cover a surprise renovation that, as Michael here knows, was actually the cost of a down payment for Laura's new luxury SUV. I dropped the letter back onto the table. The list was devastating in its precision. Mom finally found her voice, a strained, thin whisper. "That's not true. We paid you back. We gave you Christmas gifts." "You gave me a $50 Target gift card, Mom," I countered, without raising my voice, "while I was covering your $3,500 monthly mortgage payment." "No, you never paid me back. You took my financial stability for granted because you never respected the process that built it. You saw me as an endless resource, not a daughter who earned her wealth through sacrifice." Laura stood up, knocking her chair back. "You have no proof. This is insane. You're trying to ruin Thanksgiving because you're jealous of my life." "Oh, I have proof," I corrected, pulling out a slim, encrypted USB drive. "This contains a complete ledger, bank statements, wire transfer confirmation numbers, and a signed affidavit from my business manager who processed these transfers weekly. It's all documented. And since I was the sole contributor for nearly $500,000 towards a non-deeded asset, this house, Chloe has advised me that I have a significant financial claim should this become a legal dispute." I wasn't going to make a claim, but the threat was enough to make Dad physically recoil. Michael, who had been sitting motionless, finally spoke up quietly. "The SUV, you guys told me you financed the SUV yourselves." Laura shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Shut up, Michael." "No, Michael, it's okay," I said, giving my brother a look of genuine pity. "They lied to you too. They've been funding their favored child with the money from the disfavored one. It's a very clean, if utterly cruel, transaction." The confrontation intensified into a flurry of panicked accusations. Dad started yelling about how I was ungrateful and heartless. Mom sobbed dramatically about family bonds. I let them rage, maintaining my calm, controlled center. I knew the truth was a physical barrier protecting me from their emotional manipulation. "The payment is due on December 1st, I stated clearly, pointing to the documents. "The property tax is due on December 15th. Your health insurance premiums are due on the 5th. You have 4 days to figure out how you're going to cover those costs, James, because I am done. Game over." I walked over to the side table, grabbed my coat, and looked back at them one last time. Laura was staring at the USB drive like it was a ticking bomb. Dad was buried in his hands. Mom was a picture of devastated melodrama. "Yeah, I hope you all enjoy your Thanksgiving," I said, the irony thick enough to spread on the leftover dinner rolls. "It's the last meal you'll enjoy in that house that I paid for." The fallout was swift and brutal. The immediate days were filled with phone calls. Not apologies, but desperate demands. "Sarah, you can't do this. We're your parents. We'll sue," Dad threatened, his voice hoarse from yelling. "Sue me for what, Dad?" I responded calmly, back in the air, flying toward the safe haven of my Tribeca penthouse. "For paying your bills for 5 years? For funding your retirement? My lawyer is a partner at Chen & Associates. Yours is Frank Davies, who drew up a malicious will cutting out the primary financial contributor to the family's assets. I think you'll find the court will be very interested in my documentation. Let's talk about fraud and elder financial exploitation, because you exploited me." That shut him down. The realization that I had the legal firepower and the proof was the true turning point. Within a week, the house was in trouble. The December 1st mortgage payment bounced. Meanwhile, back in New York City, I was finally beginning to live my life. The years of carrying their burdens, of sacrificing my time and energy, had been a slow drain. Now that energy was flowing back. My first move was to officially transition out of my consulting job. I'd given my 2-week notice the Monday before Thanksgiving. I was done fixing other people's broken companies. I was ready to build my own empire. I launched Artemis Consulting, a boutique firm specializing in financial turnaround for high-potential women-led startups. My focus was leveraging tech and capital to correct market inefficiencies. A metaphor, I realized, for what I had just done in my own life. I used my severance pay and my significant personal capital to rent a high-rise office space in the financial district, giving me a view that made the world feel manageable. Chloe, my lawyer friend, was immensely supportive. She became the first major investor in Artemis Consulting, not just for friendship, but because she recognized the cold, strategic genius I possessed. "The trauma made you brilliant, Sarah," she told me during our opening week celebration, a sophisticated happy hour at my new office, complete with artisanal cocktails and a view of the Hudson River. "You understand leverage better than any man I know. They thought you were empty. You were just saving all your resources for your own hostile takeover." The battle with the Millers became background noise, an annoying hum I outsourced to Chloe. She sent cease and desist letters to all of them, demanding they communicate only through her. This was crucial for my mental health. I couldn't afford the emotional drain. Laura and Michael, unable to accept that the gravy train had truly stopped, tried a different tactic: public humiliation on social media. Laura posted a dramatic, tearful video on Instagram. "My successful, heartless sister abandoned our parents right before Christmas. She's hoarding her millions while they're facing foreclosure. Pray for the Millers." It was a classic move of trying to leverage the universal family-first sentiment common in the American Midwest South. But I was ready. Chloe advised me to do a single, carefully crafted response. I posted a clean, professional photo of my new office view on my LinkedIn page, accompanied by a precise, lawyer-vetted statement. I didn't mention Laura or Michael by name. While I choose to keep my professional life separate from personal drama, a recent public misrepresentation requires clarification. For the past 5 years, I have voluntarily and silently provided over $850,000 in direct financial support to my family's living expenses, including their primary residence mortgage and health insurance. This was done out of duty, not obligation. My decision to terminate this support was made following the discovery of calculated emotional and financial exclusion. I am not hoarding wealth. I am simply reclaiming the right to determine where my resources are allocated. My focus is now exclusively on my new firm, Artemis Consulting, and building a community where merit and respect are the only currencies that matter. I didn't need to say more. My professional network, full of ambitious, high-powered men and women who recognized gaslighting and family manipulation, saw right through Laura's performance. The post went viral within my professional circles. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. "Standing up for yourself is the ultimate career move, Sarah. A clear case of toxic family dynamic. Good for you for cutting them off." Laura was forced to delete her dramatic video and privatize her Instagram account. I had successfully countered their emotional appeal with irrefutable, public-facing financial data. The final confrontation came not in a courtroom, but at a forced mediation. The Millers, realizing they couldn't afford a lawsuit and desperate to restore the financial flow, agreed to a meeting in Chicago, a neutral city, at Chloe's expense. I met them in a stark, modern conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. They were noticeably different. Dad looked older, defeated. Mom was quiet, devoid of her usual theatricality. Laura looked brittle, the illusion of her perfect life cracking around the edges. Sarah, we just want to talk, Mom pleaded, eyes red-rimmed. We made a mistake. We need the money back. The house is in foreclosure proceedings. The house is in foreclosure because you never paid a cent of the principal for 5 years, trusting I would always bail you out, I stated flatly. And you can't get the money back because it was a gift, not a loan. And I've already reallocated the capital to fund the first year of Artemis Consulting. What about Michael? Dad interrupted, pointing a finger at my brother who sat beside him looking utterly miserable. He needs his debt settled. You were supposed to help your brother. My last transfer of $150,000 to Michael's accounts 3 years ago was never repaid, Dad, I replied, pulling out a printout of the ledger. And I have the text messages where you explicitly told him it was not a loan because Sarah doesn't need the money anyway. I slid the documents toward the attorney they'd hired, a nervous junior associate from a local firm. I paid my dues, and then some. I paid my way out of your life. Laura, seeing her comfortable future slipping away, finally admitted the core truth. It was just a joke, Sarah, the empty life comment. It was just a stupid joke. I met her eyes. Jokes are funny, Laura. That was cruel. That was the culmination of 40 years of telling me my entire identity, my work, my success, my life choices, was worthless because I didn't conform to your 1950s ideal of a woman. You didn't just mock my life. You mocked my sacrifice. The money wasn't the issue. The lack of respect was. And respect is non-negotiable. The mediation ended quickly. There was no deal to be made. I offered one final piece of business advice, not as their daughter, but as a professional consultant. The bank will accept a short sale. You should take it and downsize immediately. Cut your losses and start learning how to live within your actual means. You have zero leverage here. None. I left the room, followed by Chloe, leaving them trapped in the consequences of their actions. My path of reinvention was exhilarating. I didn't look back. I bought a stunning modern loft in San Francisco's Mission District, a city that celebrated innovation and independence. Artemis Consulting flourished, taking on clients who understood the value of sharp, fearless leadership. I finally invested in myself, enrolling in a 3-month intensive coding course at Stanford because I wanted to understand the tech core of my clients' businesses. I was building a fortune that was truly mine, free of resentment and obligation. My new life wasn't empty. It was meticulously curated. I finally hosted a proper Thanksgiving dinner that year, not in a strained dining room, but on the rooftop deck of my San Francisco loft, overlooking the sparkling bay. The guests were Chloe, my brilliant new business partner, Emma, and a handful of other friends, my chosen family. The atmosphere was light, filled with genuine affection and respect. To the opposite of an empty life, Chloe toasted, raising her glass of Napa Valley Cabernet. I smiled, the feeling of freedom washing over me. To the kind of life that's defined by what you build, not what you're born into. I thought of my family, the Millers, struggling in the suburbs of Texas, forced to sell the house, forced to work for the first time in their lives, forced to confront the harsh reality that entitlement is not a currency. They had their traditional American life, but I had the true American dream, the ability to reinvent myself entirely, to earn my success, and to stand alone, financially and emotionally unburdened. I looked out at the city lights, the symbol of countless possibilities and endless ambition. I had been called selfish, heartless, and empty, but in cutting the anchor that was dragging me down, I had found my true self. The journey had been painful, but the realization was profound. I took my shot, reclaimed my power, and rebuilt my life on a foundation of unshakable self-worth. It was the greatest hostile takeover of all time, and I had truly gotten the last laugh.